Yo, what's up, Sci Fam? It's your boy Nickel, and today we're going to record and review the 7 attributes of living things. And we'll conclude by thinking about the question, are viruses alive? Okay, well, you might not have your science notebook, but luckily, a normal piece of paper, a computer piece of paper or a lined piece of paper, if you lay it horizontally, fold it in half, and then rip it in half, this half here will actually fit right inside of a composition notebook. So you can tape it in when you return to school. So you can go ahead and do that to record these pages because you're going to need these notes as you move throughout this unit and especially as you do the level up quizzes. So again, we're going to look at the 7 attributes of living things. So make sure you title your page with that exact title, 7 attributes of living things. All right, well, let's get started here by going along, and as I fill in the blanks, you just need to go ahead and record each of these note pages. So to start here, things considered to be living or alive display all of the following characteristics. All right, so what are those 7 characteristics? Well, we're going to start with organization. Organization can be on a level in one cell or in multiple cells, but regardless, all living things are going to have an organization amongst them. So what that means is they contain specialized, coordinated parts, meaning that the different parts have different functions within the organization of this organism. So the organization can be, like I said, made of one or more cells. So one cell has its own organization with organelles within it, and then cellular organisms have multiple cells and there's organization in those. I mean, look at us humans. We have all different types of specialized structures. So if we were looking at just one cell, we could look at the fact that atoms are some of the simplest parts of this that make up the matter amongst us, the stuff around us. And those atoms are what create molecules. So when we string those atoms together, we get molecules, and molecules are what actually create the cell organelles. So if we just have one cell, the organization is the atoms make up specific molecules make specific organelles. When we have more than one cell, those cell organelles then are going to make our cells. Those cells combine together to make the stuff that we call our tissues, and the tissues make organs. Now, organs work together in organ systems. So we could even add another layer of organization here and say that we have organ systems, like our respiratory system includes our nose and our mouth, our larynx, and our lungs. So there's lots of different organs involved in all of that. Number 2, the second attribute of living things is having a metabolism. Now, having a metabolism is basically a series of chemical reactions that are used to allow organisms to do work. Okay, so metabolism is how we digest our food. Those chemical reactions allow us to gain energy from our food so that we can do work. Now, when we say do work for different organisms, it can mean a lot of different stuff. These are things like just being able to, for example, move around. So we could say the doing work part is moving around. It can also mean growing or reproducing. Or it could even mean catching food or gaining food or catching prey. Now, in order to be able to grow and reproduce, you have to be able to use chemical reactions to create energy so that they can do work, so organisms can do work. Now, number 3, numero tres, is a word that sounds complex, but it's really simple. It's homeostasis. It's simple because it's just the ability to, well, it's not simple, it's not easy necessarily, but it's the ability to maintain the internal conditions that are necessary for cells to function. So homeostasis is the ability to maintain the internal conditions for the cells in an organism to function. So for an example, our homeostasis, our bodies stay around, on average, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. If we get too hot, we say we have a fever, and that means that we're losing our homeostasis. If our body temperature got too hot, we could actually die. And if it got too cold, we could also die, because our body must stay at that temperature in order to maintain the conditions necessary for all of our cells to do their job. So the next thing is, if all this stuff is going, then an organism can have growth. Now, growth is just simply when our cells become bigger. Or if it's a single cell, that one cell becomes bigger. But usually if it's more than one cell, like in humans, it means that you end up having more cells. So your body's able to grow more cells to replace the old ones, or to add more so that you can actually grow taller, or your arms can grow longer. So either more cells are made or the one cell becomes bigger. If more cells are made, though, this process is one that we've learned about, most likely, or you may or may not have, but it's mitosis. Mitosis is the process of when an organism that has many cells makes more of those cells. And number 5 is reproduction. Now, the 5th attribute of living things is the ability to reproduce, which is basically just creating new organisms, copies of, not exact copies necessarily, but making new versions of themselves through either sexual reproduction or asexual reproduction. Enough said. Number 6 is the ability to respond. So we're going to say have a response. So it's just the ability to respond to changes in their environment. So if we think about humans, when it gets too hot and we start to lose our homeostasis, we sweat to try to cool our body down. That response, that sweat response, is going to help us adapt to our environment. Now, when we get cold, our response is to shiver, which causes there to be micro motions amongst our muscles that help us warm up. So if an organism can respond, that's going to help it stay alive, especially in a changing environment. Speaking of a changing environment, let's go to number 7. It's the ability for a species, if we think about the whole species, the population, to go through evolution. Let's break that apart a little bit. So basically it means that the DNA makeup of a population, not of one organism, but if we look at all the organisms in a group, that population, the genetic makeup of a population may change over time. And that's what we call adaptation. So if you can adapt to a new environment, if your organisms can, within a whole population, those adaptations allow the species to be able to survive in a changing environment. So, for example, if humans got stuck in an ice age, humans that had the genes that allowed them to stay warmer in cold environments, or that had attributes that allowed them to stay colder or warmer in cold environments, would be more successful, and they would pass on their genetics and so on. In our population, the genetic makeup of the population would end up changing because the environment is changing, and the environment is going to select for certain traits. So also, if we look at the attributes of living things, they typically tend to evolve. So let's get down to our question here. Are viruses alive? Question mark. Well, this is a hotly debated topic right here. So, what people say is, well, viruses can only reproduce in a host cell. What that means is that they're basically a parasite. They use other organisms. And when they use other organisms, typically it hurts the other organism when they use their resources. We'll learn more about that as we continue on throughout this unit. So they can only reproduce in a host cell, so they can't reproduce on their own. Well, they need that host cell. They're a parasite. Also, they do not have a quote-unquote cell structure. They have a different type of organization. So their organization is kind of funky there. And then also, they do not carry out metabolism. So they're not using chemical reactions to gain energy. So if we look at the general consensus, they are not generally considered to be alive. Wait, there's something here. Let's zoom in. But not everyone or all scientists actually agree to that. So it's something that people can debate and they can argue either for or against. But it's an interesting question nonetheless. If we look at those 7 attributes, we can start to really analyze and dissect a virus to see if it's alive. And as we learn more and more about viruses and we analyze the coronavirus, you might be able to come up with a better answer to this question than I did here. Well, I'll see you on the next one. Peace.